Hello and welcome to the live, everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a little pause, let the comments come through. But today we're discussing parts 3 and parts 4 of Caste. I'm anxious to hear your guys' thoughts. So let me go ahead and prompt some of the things. I guess let's start off with what were your thoughts? Like, what would you rate part 3 and part 4 of Caste? And I'll let those comments come in because I know the live chat, it could be a little bit delayed. While we're talking about it. And let me pull up the comments and the chats. And while those are loading, for me, for part 3 and part 4 of Caste, I'll probably just start off. I'll probably say that I gave it probably like a 3 stars. I'm teetering between 3 and a 3.5 stars for it. It's interesting because, as a lot of you guys know, I'm rereading it. And I think the first time around I gave it 4 stars, but now breaking it up and pacing myself through it, I'm giving it like 3.5 stars. Dwayne is joining me, as you guys probably noticed. I probably should have said that. I have Dwayne with me today to discuss parts 3 and 4. But
yeah, I mean, ultimately, I'm gonna be real. I wasn't really in the mental space for the past few months to be able to really dive into Caste like I probably would have wanted to. I think fortunately I've had a good background in some of the American history that was touched on in the book, but not so much, the connections to some of the other caste systems that we're probably more familiar with. So I can't rate the sections necessarily. I have read some excerpts of it. And I think one thing that stood out to me was the way it was written definitely seemed to be very high level. And so that's something that I can comment on, at least from the excerpts that I read. That's definitely 5-star writing, at least from what I saw from those excerpts.
Yeah, I would agree. You're right. It is very well written and really good writing. 5 stars. I guess the reason I think I did 3 and 4 was because of when I was reading it, it did feel kind of repetitive throughout. Like it did feel like I was cycling through and reading the same thing, but I don't know if that's just because I'm rereading it where I was more like, okay. Because the first time around, I don't think I felt that repetitive nature. So I don't know if that's even a fair assessment, but I guess I gave it 3 and 4 stars, which I'll talk about some of the reasons why. There was like 2 issues that I had within this part 3 and 4 that I guess we'll get into a little bit later. But I guess, what were some of the things that stood out for you guys? Was there any sections that stood out? I'll pose it to you guys as well to join in. And then also, Dwayne, were there any things that stood out for you, or should I go first?
You go ahead and go first, and I'll try and expound upon it.
Okay. So for me, I guess what stood out the most for parts 3 and parts 4 is there was a section within there. It was actually the first pillar. And I probably have my notes here. And it was basically, it was the divine will and the laws of nature. And that was the first pillar of Caste that was discussed. And it basically drew in parallels of how people have used religion essentially to support oppression, I guess, for lack of a better term. And Isabel Wilkerson, she like breaks down from the Bible as well as from Manu. And, I can't speak on Manu. I've never read any of that, but I can speak on the actual Bible and how the Bible has been utilized basically to support rhetoric that there's a subordinate caste. And she uses the example of Ham. For those of you who aren't familiar, and maybe he didn't read, she talks about the story of Noah's son, Ham, who was basically cursed. And a lot of people argue that Black people are descendants of Ham, and that's why we're supposed to be slaves and subordinate caste and all sorts of craziness. And I've heard that before, and it's just so ridiculous. Love Doan Niece. I definitely was more triggered during parts 3 and 4. The stories during this time around were really frustrating to read. Yeah, and I think a lot of it, I agree with that. A lot of it, of course, Jim Crow is a big part of this. And she talks about like the antebellum South and Jim Crow South. And I think a lot of those things are triggering and stand out. I found that reading the personal stories, this is narrative nonfiction. Once again, when you hear those stories and hearing of people being burned and brutally like those types of things, it's not pleasure reading. Like you're not going to enjoy reading that.
So did she talk about the rationalization between some of the illogical things? So like certain things in the Bible say you should do this.
That's the part you read, because I read it to us. You must have zoned out.
Maybe so.
Okay, so what were you saying? Sorry. I was like, wait a minute. I know you read that because we were reading that part together.
So no, the
biblical part, pillar 1.
Right, the biblical part, but the contradictory nature of things. So like, thou shalt not kill with.
Well, she wasn't.
You should be slave.
She wasn't known because she was just focusing on basically the pillars of caste, meaning like what every caste system technically has. They have these 8 pillars, and there's always some divine will or justification for it. She wasn't saying that it was correct or even saying that things in the Bible clearly contradict this. She was just saying that these are the foundations or the pillars of most caste systems. So I guess no.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I saw another one. I think the book was very informative. Introducing us to the concept of the Germans and the Americans being a caste system was brilliant. I give the book so far no less than a rating of 4. Yeah, I agree. The book as a whole, I see right now, I'm at a 4-star. I'm still at a 4-star. I think parts 3 and 4, I don't think I like them as much as parts 1 and 2. And I mean, I think that for several reasons. Some of this, I might have a little bit of a bias. I'll be honest. I might have a little bit of a bias. I know I'm jumping around, but I'll get into one of the areas that annoyed me a little bit.
Before you
don't do that. Okay.
I think what that comment does bring up is one of the important parts of this book that you guys spoke to the last time. But just contextualizing this for people who don't see American history as bad, with things that they do consider bad or evil and things like that. And I think that's an important thing that this book has done in terms of the conversation, generally contextualizing it outside of just American history and juxtaposing it with things that people will be able to more easily see the parallels. And obviously there's been backlash to accepting those parallels, but it has created a conversation around those things, which I think is one of the things that the book tried to do. And I hope I'm not going too far with this, but I think, part of me is like, we have a lot of history books. These are facts that have been shared. And so I was always thinking, so what's the purpose of this book? What is she trying to accomplish, I guess? And I guess basically one thing is when you establish a framework or when you put something under a framework where it's not usually discussed or considered, it allows you to maybe have a different response to that framework. So instead of us thinking only within the American context, we can continue to look to how some of those other systems were broken down. And there is one tool that a lot of those other systems that are talked about in the book were changed. That is not something that Americans have adopted in terms of their response.
Like acknowledging that stuff happened?
No, that's after the tool that's used.
What tool are you talking about?
I'm not going to talk about it, but
okay. I wish I knew.
There's an obvious tool that stands out in. So she talks about South Africa at some point, right? I don't know if it's.
Yeah, she talks about South Africa, but not that much. Just more so how South Africa based some of their systems on American system. Like America led the way on a lot of these systems that we look down upon, basically. But I think that's a good point of basically with Caste. What I do like a lot, of course, is even though a lot of this information, maybe a lot of people know about it, and maybe this isn't necessarily new information, but the way it was packaged, I think helps people dissect it and examine it in a different light. I don't know if the people who need to read it the most are going to read it, but I can't really focus on that. But just the fact that this book does exist, I do agree with that. And on this section, even though parts 3 and 4, it was hard and it was going into a lot of more details of the gruesomeness or the brutality, and kind of comparing that to other systems, like you said, in other countries where we automatically, everybody knows this was heinous, this is disgusting. Everyone in America is in agreement that what happened over there is wrong and not okay. But we're not all in agreement in America that what happened here is not okay. So to draw those parallels hopefully helps people to shift in their head and see how bad it actually was. So I do agree with that. And okay, so Simula Craw said, I agree with the contextualizing with the Nazis is going to be super helpful when I have family read this who idolize American history. Yeah. The discussion of the creation of the mid-caste is relevant today and demonstrated even in how ethnic groups voted in this election. Whoa, let's pause there, because that was actually one of the sections that was very interesting, because her breaking down how other minority groups, because we're in this binary caste system where the two polar opposites, I guess you could say, is the all the way upper class, all the way subordinate caste being black and white. Everything that is technically in between or doesn't clearly identify with one or the other is kind of going after, I think she calls it, trying to be under the white tent. I forget what the chapter was called, but I'm trying to fall with the dominant caste, so everybody who's in between there kind of has to figure out where on the spectrum are they trying to align. And she talks about Asian Americans. She talks about, Indians. She talks about Black people from other countries, meaning like Black people's outside of America, which I'm going to get into that too. That's one of the ones where I felt like I had a little bit of bias, but we'll talk about it and we'll see if I'm being biased or if that was a little weird. But I don't want to go all over the place, but I thought that was a really good section overall of trying to break down the differences. Bernie said the Oprah Winfrey Book Club has a podcast dedicated to each of the 8 pillars. Wow, I didn't know that. Isabel Wilkerson is talking to Oprah in them, along with some members of the book club. Thank you so much for sharing that. I am definitely going to check that out, because all of the pillars, that each one of them it could be a book on its own, like each one of the freaking pillars. So that's awesome. I connected that to the model minority phenomenon that affects Asian Americans. Yeah, and I think that she used that to explain that, but I think she also just lumped all other people, whether they be Black or not Black, from other countries, kind of all other minorities. So I thought that was very, I don't want to say interesting, but weird for me when she lumped Black people from other countries in that bucket. I could see where she was going, but it didn't seem as balanced. So let me get into that. Please let me. Please okay. Because I want to, because I really, when I'm reading this, and I'm reading this for the second time, the first time I felt really bothered by it. Second time I felt like I digested a little bit better, but I'm still bothered by it. And I kind of really want to talk to other people to see if it's a bias amongst myself. For those of you who don't know, I was born in America. My parents were Haitian. So I'm Haitian American. So, growing up with that, you have your own different experiences in general whenever your family's from somewhere else. But Dwayne, you're African American, meaning I'm African American too, but you're not of Haitian or another country descent. So I guess from the example that she was using were Black people who have generations who have lived in America versus Black people who are from countries like Ghana, Jamaica. She didn't specifically say Haiti, but I mean, she said all these other countries where there's Black people around. And let me see how I put up a quote on here, and she put like, while white immigrants stand to gain status by becoming Americans, Black immigrants may actually lose social status if they lose their cultural distinctiveness. And this was a quote, and she uses this quote to then kind of break down and explain like basically why there's this rift between Black people in America versus Black people who come to America from other countries, is that Black people from other countries choose to kind of disassociate and constantly show that they're different, or they won't say I'm African American. They'll let you know, no, I'm Jamaican. Like they want you to know that. And the fact, she also goes into a quote of someone saying that they work hard to not lose their accent because they don't ever want people to think that they're American. That was really the line that got me, that I think that was the triggering part for me, where it was like, what? That you had to find the one lone wolf in all my experiences of all the different people I know from different countries. That is one of the biggest issues that they have, is wanting to for people to not be able to distinguish their accents, or to be accepted, or not to be seen as other. People will automatically assume you're, now this is where I'm projecting, and I'm probably was triggered in a different way, where I was like, firsthand, so many people that I know who are Black from other countries have a hard time feeling othered, and you remember we had a thing during college. We had let me not monopolize this, but in college, there was one of the seminars, in college, you'd be having a whole bunch of seminars. One of them, I forget what it was exactly called, but it was basically like the divide of Caribbean Americans versus African Americans, essentially Black people in the diaspora, and kind of like the us versus them mentality. And, African Americans were saying, nah, it's y'all who don't be wanting to be associated. Y'all think y'all better than us. And then Caribbean America was like, no, we were bullied like hell. We were like the scum of the earth, like all this other stuff. We wouldn't be accepted. So it's like this constant rift. And there was all this talk of, I don't know, extra. And she parallels this in Crabs in a Barrel. She does this whole thing. And I'm thinking, why we got this section on this? Well, I don't know if I'm triggered, y'all. Okay, I'll pause there. You go ahead and talk about it.
So I do think, just from my understanding of the excerpt, I think her point of view was coming from people who have like doctors and master's degree, which I think their assimilation process is different from a working class process, or a child, which is, I think, the frame of mind you're coming from. So to me, what she's saying there is, if you're a doctor over there,
yeah,
and you come over here, make sure, keeping your accent may be beneficial to you, as opposed to, losing it, as opposed to someone who is really starting from the bottom, has no attachment to any job, no profession, no nothing. You might want to assimilate because somebody might judge you and make you feel like that. I think make you feel like scum.
Yeah.
That's, I think, more so where she's going with that, but I don't have the context of the whole passage. But I can see why you felt that way, given your own experience. And I think your experience is valid. And I think potentially and I think the research she did might be speaking to another valid experience.
And I think, okay, so there's two things that you said. One of them is, I think that was a great perspective, and that was a great shift. And I think that's where I was coming from initially when she was outlining it, especially with that specific passage. To her things, how heavily researched I feel like all of this was. There just wasn't research to support some of the claims that she was saying. She used one quote from a person.
It wasn't research relative to the other pieces, or it wasn't research kind of at all? It's just her more.
I felt like there was, and this again could be my bias, but I felt like she ran with probably preconceived notions, unconscious bias that she probably perceives of Black people from other countries, and used a quote to confirm that. And I'm going to read more of the passage, because just to refresh, because initially I felt that way. You guys saw the quote on the screen. So after that, it says, many recent African American immigrants are better educated, better traveled. So it goes along to what you were talking about, than many Americans, and may be fluent in multiple languages, and do not wish to be deemed the lowest caste in their adopted homeland, which makes sense. And she said the caste system encourages Black immigrants to do everything they can to build distance between themselves and the subordinated caste they might be taken for. Like everyone else, they are exposed to the corrosive stereotypes of African Americans, and may work to make sure that people know they are not of that group, but are Jamaican or Grenadian or Ghanaian. a Caribbean immigrant told him, since I have been here, I have always recognized that this is a racist country, and I have made every effort to not lose my accent. That's when I started rolling my eyes right there, because I was like, okay, that's an interesting quote. I guess I could see that. And then it goes into, it is a clever self-perpetuating tool of the caste system to keep those at the bottom divided in a manufactured fight to avoid this last place. This has led to occasional friction between people descended from Africans who arrived in Africa at different points in our history. Some immigrants from the Caribbean and Africa, la la la. You guys read this, so I don't really need to go into this, but basically it's saying that people from, this is going into let me skip a little bit. Sorry, I'm jumping. Try as it may to entice newcomers to take sides in upholding the hierarchy, the caste system fails to reach some people. Some children of immigrants from the Caribbean, people like Eric Holder, Colin Powell, Malcolm X, Shirley Chisholm, and Stokely Carmichael, among many others, have shared in the common plight of those in the lowest caste, become advocates for justice, and transcended these divisions for the greater good.
Who was the first person she said?
She said Eric Holder.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But basically, my whole point with that, it's the way it's framed. It makes it seem like the majority of the way I took it. And again, I told y'all, I have a bias with this. The way I took it, it made me feel like the majority of immigrants try to disassociate themselves with Black people. And there's a few of them who actually have helped towards the justice, as if Black people haven't helped with everything. When I say Black people, I mean Black people from the Caribbean.
Yeah, before I go further into what you're talking about, all of the people in the example she mentioned are fair-skinned people or pretty like light brown, except for, I think she said Shirley Chisholm. But anyway, so that is a part of probably some of the other stuff she talked about. But anyway, I think for you and your bias is particularly interesting because Haiti is just different when it comes to a lot of things. So Haiti's acceptance of their Blackness and their African roots and all of that stuff. And I think also the way that Haitians are treated in general is different from other islanders. Would you say that's true in America?
That's a very, let me divert. No, I'm digesting what you said. Yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. Yes, it is. It is true that Haitians are technically, it does feel, and I don't know if it's a personal thing, and I don't want to make this about Haitian Americans because it's not, but
no, it's not.
But you're right. From my background, maybe I'm a little bit more triggered because Haitians do have a unique probably experience versus other ones when it comes to the way they're treated, as well as the history of Haitians in general. And I kind of wanted to pivot so I'm not missing some of these comments. Bernie said, I have met quite a few Black people from the islands who make sure they let you know that they are not Black Americans. So I agree with her insight. Love Delaney said, there is this pressure in America to situate yourself far away from Blackness in American context, which that makes sense. I do understand that. I remember traveling to Northern Ireland and an African woman asked me, are all the Black women in America like Sharkeisha? Because of the terrible stereotypes they see about Black Americans. Mm-hmm. Stimula said, I think it's a good point that Wilkerson might be focusing too much on like an academic atmosphere versus kids growing up as second generation. Yeah. And I wanted to kind of pivot back to what you were talking about, because, that's why these conversations are good, because sometimes when you feel attacked, I'll talk about myself. In that passage, I felt personally attacked. And I recognized it. I understood. I had emotional, a knee-jerk reaction to reading that. And it made me uncomfortable. And a lot of that has to do with my background of how much I was outcasted, and Haitian people were specifically outcasted, specifically in Florida. I've heard it in New York and other places, but I grew up in Florida. So that probably has a lot to do, especially with all of the Black pride. I think also that Haiti's known for being so pro-Black. It's just hard.
And it would have been interesting, because if I were to think, would you say that, I'm not going to derail the conversation.
No, derail it. We in it now. Derail it. And I'll underail it if it needs to be.
Would you say that Black people in Florida at the time you're growing up saw Haitians as a caste below them?
Oh, absolutely.
So that's another element that I think she could have talked about.
But she probably just doesn't know.
Well, she researched.
Yeah,
in
does,
her research, she could have found this in the island piece. But I think that's adding to your filter on this piece. Yeah. To me, that's an important piece of your perception of this, and maybe her lack of kind of including that nuance in this part of it.
Yeah, because then another part of me, I was like, I try to tell myself, step back a bit and understand, because there's truth to what she's saying. Like, when all of this is truth, I just felt like it wasn't balanced, because I feel like there is a truth. And, I forget what exactly the terms are, but I've heard from several people from, who are descendants in Africa of Nigerian descent or stuff of that nature, who have said, no, like being African-American, like that's a load. Like they also feel like that's just a perception that is constantly fed to them as well. And when they come here, they expect that, or whatever the case is, that, African-Americans, that is the lowest, and all this other stuff in the caste. And they do share in a lot of those thoughts, just because of the propaganda, kind of like the example that I forget who gave that Lo Doni said. That's what they see. So I do think there's truth to that. And I have heard people who are like, if I'm not trying to keep using Nigerians. I can't keep doing that, but I'm just saying, like, I've heard like, I'm Nigerian, we come from the best tribe. We come from all this other stuff. And it's like a lot of pride that's deemed with that, which you should have that pride. But then there is a lot of like, if you do get with an African-American or something, that's like not okay. So I guess I acknowledge and I understand where she was saying that. I don't think I really honed in on the education level, even though she explicitly stated that, because the way it was packaged and it was only kind of one-sided in that way, of only focusing probably on people from upper caste in other countries, and people who probably have a different experience than my probably unique Haitian American experience, I guess. I think of myself as Black, as in Black American, as in Black Caribbean. And that's the other thing. Haitians don't really, like, for some Caribbeans, they don't really accept Haitians because we probably speak a different language. We speak French. For Latin American countries, even though we're Latin American, it's always like we don't feel like we belong. So I probably am carrying some of that weight. So I'll admit I might have had bias, and I see maybe where she was going, but I still don't think it was balanced enough. And that's where I stand. So Love Denise said, your perspective adds an important layer to the conversation, though. So you are very much validated and feeling that way and expressing it. Yes. Coco Chanel said, yes, I see that Black people from other places want the benefits of being Black, but not the labels of being Black, i.e. scholarship. Okay. She put Black American for correction on that. That could have been a really fascinating aspect of caste, how Black Americans can view immigrants as lower caste. That I wish she had explored more. Yeah, I wish it was more balanced, because I think she only explored one half of it. But I also have to recognize, she maybe just doesn't really know. And I guess maybe that's not a good enough excuse if she's a researcher. Yeah. But there's so much to cover in the book.
Right. And there's other scholars who probably focus on that topic who maybe...
I haven't read it.
That don't mean it's not out there.
I need to write it. That's what I need to do. I need to actually research in depthly, or actually research to see what books actually talk about that kind of nuance. Because I do think there's valid points on all of it. And I think the good argument that she does make is there's just a need to not be on that bottom caste. That point I think is absolutely true, whether you're Black or whatever, because she talks about colorism. This was one thing that I thought was weird. As much as colorism affects Blacks in America, it got like 2 sentences. So I'm like, how did you have all this time to talk about all that?
Remember not Mary McLeod Bethune, but the what's the movie we watched?
Oh, you're talking about the movie of whatchamacallit?
Madam C.J. Walker.
Madam C.J. Walker. Yeah.
That's probably why she didn't put colorism.
That's not why. You think that's why? Because that movie.
They made it seem like the light-skinned competitor was her biggest issue. So colorism was like her biggest issue. As opposed to
you could make it seem like, I don't think she would have framed it.
She wanted to detract it from all the intricacies of how Black people are interact based on.
I guess my whole point is she wrote 2 sentences about that. It was just interesting because this is in the same section with the whole crabs in a barrel and all that focus on people from other countries and stuff like that and all that other stuff. So it was just interesting. Like, and I guess that's also was like we skim over that and then we go into this area. And I don't think that area was fully developed. So it was more so of a gripe of mine. I guess I get what you're saying, but colorism is something that affects people across the globe, as well as specifically in this country based on this hierarchy of caste.
Yeah, that's true.
It's very clear that colorism is alive and exists. Just like when you said those examples of all those people, what was the first thing you said? Light skin. And I'm thinking, what does that have to do with anything? Well, because that's naturally in your head that you went to master degrees. They are mostly educated or higher ranked. You naturally said it. All those people, with the exception of Shirley, they all light skinned, which it didn't even have anything technically to do with it, but it does.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like colorism, it has everything to do. When you think of most of the people who are in power or most of the people who have advantage, it's usually lighter skinned people. Like that's just how it's historically been. And she talks about the proximity to whiteness and kind of the benefits that go with that. And also kind of how everything's in proximity to whiteness, basically, from that standpoint within the caste. But it wasn't really digged in. And it was like 3 sentences, which I thought was weird. But let me go ahead and pause out here and see if I'm missing anything on the in the conversation.
I think you're caught up.
Oh, am I caught up? Okay. Well, the next thing I wanted to talk about, I guess I'm shifting if there's nothing else on that. Redlining. So when did you learn about redlining and where? She talks about redlining in the book. And for a lot of us, some of us, a majority of, maybe you heard of it, maybe you haven't. I don't really know what the pulse is on redlining of when you first learned about it. Was this new to you? Was this your first experience hearing about it? And what were your thoughts on her kind of going into that and talking about the centuries, of basically handing out reparations to white people who lost from nothing. Like they didn't really lose anything. They just kind of, slavery ended, Jim Crow started, all this other stuff. And it's like these constant reparations, in a sense, that have been given to the white people while denying Black people and making it harder, has created this wealth gap. So, yeah, I guess I'll ask you, Dwayne. Do you know when you first learned about redlining and where?
So maybe not the term, but the general concept of redlining. So I always understood, or at some point throughout life, or probably starting early on, just going to museums, learning things, spending time with family. You understand that discrimination takes place within institutions along racial lines. Usually there's white people in charge of institutions. And then Black people bear the brunt of whatever discrimination.
But redlining specifically. And then let me go to that. Let me see. Redlining, for the definition of that, for those who may or may have not read, redlining is the systematic denial of various services by federal government agencies, local governments, as well as the private sector, either directly or through the selective raising of prices. And this is primarily dealing with housing and stuff of that nature.
Right.
But
so, yeah, going back to what I was saying is just, I learned that these types of things took place over time, and usually there'll be a big payout by some bank every few years regarding their loan practices. So that's usually where I learned about. Maybe in high school I really started paying attention to it more. Redlining, the term itself, maybe more as an adult, but the practice of redlining, I've always
I think I've always known, in a general kind of like what you're saying, like, of course, I've always known that, there's been systematic ways that Black people have been held, and that's into different ways. And then kind of even with the housing and forced into Black ghettos and segregation, all these things have not periodically, but pretty much throughout time have created this even larger wealth gap that continues to happen. Like I've always kind of known that. Redlining specifically, understanding the intricacies and how much had gone into home ownership, more than, hearing about just random Black families that were able to somehow not fake their way, but get someone to be their poser person and be a white person to buy a home and do all these other random things for them to get housings. That kind of slowly creeped in, probably maybe while I was in college or maybe even post-college. And then I think up until maybe a few years ago, I think redlining was the first time I heard of the term and really understood how in depth it went into literally taxing you in a sense of making it where you're just not going to, it's systematic where you're not going to get these loans and you're going to automatically have a rate that's just more. Like, even though I knew in theory, I think that happens and that it still happens and stuff like that, to really know that term and really realize how deeply rooted it was and all of the effects of it, not until recently. So I was really happy that she included that in the book, because she talks about this and she talks about several of the other ways. But whenever we hear the case for reparations, which I don't think she even talks about reparations, I don't recall it when reading, but whenever there's this call for reparations, the whole thing is, oh, slavery was so long ago, you get over it and stuff and all this other stuff. And it's like, it's not just about slavery. It's about so much more, even though slavery was a big part of it and no one ever got that 40 acres and a mule. But it's also about the systemic advantages that people of the dominant caste have had, while the disadvantages were intentional and systemic, and not only that, in laws and stuff that made Black people at a disadvantage to not get some of these same benefits and to be charged more. And additional to that, it's like she puts the argument, like, if you were someone who basically, if your parents had bought a house between this time and that time, you have profited from this. Like, you know, people are like, oh, well, that's not me. They always, you know, and I think by showing how you benefit from this stuff and everyone has benefited from this, current who's alive today helps to eliminate that separation. Sorry.
I like the trajectory you're on. I'm going to pause it a little bit to get to kind of my general issue while you pull up some of the people's responses to when they learned about it. But that's part of my issue is like, how much do you need to know? Like, it's either a caste system or it's not. We can't say there's a caste system, but learning.
Wait one second. I'm gonna pause on that.
Okay.
Because that might take us on a whole different thing. Let me get to the comments. So I learned about it when I was researching HOAs and why they exist, but Wilkerson had so much information that I hadn't learned before. Coco Chanel said, if I'm honest, a couple years ago, and I am good and grown, shaking my head. You don't even need to shake your head, because this stuff is just stuff that isn't taught. And this is why these issues continue to be perpetuated. Not issues. I'm not saying this is why, but people constantly don't think it's that bad, or this is that bad, or this is an issue. Like, they think the playing field, even if it's not level, they don't realize how much of a gap it is. In addition to that, it's just not taught. It's like a fairy tale version.
Sounds like all the pillars of the caste system, though.
What does?
Like that, not accepting it, not putting it in the books, all this other stuff. That's how it's maintained.
Yeah, those are the pillars. That's the caste. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, Deanna Bailey, I've known since college, and I took an urban politics class. I learned about it in college as we uncovered the history of housing in suburbs in Cleveland, Ohio. Ooh, that sounds interesting. That's an interesting course. Bernie said, I heard of redlining when talking about people keeping us out of certain neighborhoods. When? I don't even remember. Yeah, I don't think I know the specific time either. I think that this book did a good job, but I do think the 1619 Project does a phenomenal job of really breaking it down. They did something similar, almost like to what your course was talking about. The person who said they took a course of the suburbs, history of housing in suburbs in Cleveland, Ohio. In 1619 Project, they did it with Atlanta, and basically explained like why the city is structured the way it is and why, was it 285? I forget how the highways are constructed. And it was just phenomenal. If you guys haven't checked it out, it's free. Anyways, crazy is Black people talk about it all the time, but not defined as redlining, more another aspect of being Black in America. 2 snaps to that.
Yeah, that's kind of similar to what I was saying.
Yeah, that's exactly pretty much it. And then that was such a powerful line about you have benefited. Yeah, exactly. You have benefited. I feel like saying that in explicit terms takes away that distance for you to recognize that you specifically, who are alive today, right now, have benefited. This isn't some your great-great-grandmammy. No, you. Like, anyways, but back to what you were saying. I think you were saying basically like, why do we even have to talk about this?
No, that's not what I was saying.
Oh, I summarized. I'm sorry. Say it again then. I misunderstood.
No, I don't want to. I like the path we're on. So
No, say it.
I don't really remember what it was.
Oh, now I can't go to the comments again to change this.
Yeah, let's just go to the next thing. I think people gave kind of their experience with redlining.
I know, but say what you were going to say.
I don't remember what it was.
Oh, you don't remember? Okay. So that was pretty much really all the things that I really had. Because nothing else really stood out to me. I guess I'll put one thing on here that was big when she was talking about like basically the bans on marriage throughout. I forget the term that she used, which y'all don't judge me. That term was new for me, the term that she used. I can't even remember exactly it. But basically this quote on here was basically saying that Alabama did not throw out its law against intermarriage until the year 2000. Even then, 40% of the electorate in that referendum voted in favor of keeping the marriage ban on the books, which doesn't surprise me that Alabama was the last one to basically try to not veto, but remove, outlaw intermarriage. But give me 1 second and I'm gonna pull up exactly what that term was. If I can remember it. Endogamy. Have you heard of that term? Oh, you haven't? I was going to say, I know you have heard of it, but that was what it was. Pillar number 3, endogamy and the control of marriage and mating. So that section was another one that just stood out to me simply for the fact of hearing the kind of, even though it's not new, but hearing the similarities again with how things were done here and in other countries, with India, Nazi Germany and America, and how like controlling that controls so many aspects of access that people have. And by having those type of laws and those type of rules, something as simple as who you can marry, it changes the access, because it's also is one of the points of defining who is white and who is not white, and the links that different states went to specifying how if you have basically one drop of Black blood, you're not white, and you couldn't marry someone who is white or whatever the case is. So it was just an interesting section for me, as well as the term itself. I had never heard of it. But I guess, did you have anything on that?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, and I guess other people were just saying that they had never heard of it before. So I guess I'll pause here. We're almost at the 45-minute mark. Was there anything else that stood out to you guys or to you, Dwayne, that you guys wanted to discuss? And we could talk about it now. I'll give it a second to let the comments come through, as I know there's a delay. But if not, then we could just wrap up with our final thoughts. Was there anything else that stood out for you, Dwayne?
Not really. Like I said, I only was able to read a few excerpts because it's kind of an overwhelming topic for me the past few months to really dive into, like Jim was able to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have anything necessarily that stands out.
Yeah, for me, I guess the only other thing that stood out, which I debated talking about or not talking about simply because it is so relevant to today, it was, which I don't know, Dwayne, you don't have to comment, so don't feel like you have to comment on this. I know you probably don't want to. It's just basically she goes into how white people of the working class have historically voted against their own interests simply to protect their place in the caste system or protect whiteness, the thought of it. And she goes down and breaks down basically how basically from the time when you came over to America from these other countries, how becoming white and deconstructing whiteness or whatever was a whole thing, and how people of the working class, white Americans, may have so much in common with other minority groups, specifically Black people, but they will vote against that interest simply to protect their whiteness. And she goes into all these breakdowns as to the psychology behind wanting to protect that. And I thought that was an interesting time. It's not new. I know it's stuff that we've all heard. We all try to understand why would you do that? Why would you do that? But I think breaking it down on print and talking about it was very important. And it also kind of lended itself of her drawing into how we got to 2016 and how the nation did kind of have a shift from the Obama administration to the current administration that is present today, and kind of that anxiety or that fear of losing whatever type of stance that you think that you have because you saw that someone from a subordinate caste was able to rise to the highest power in the country, which would be the president. So kind of how like Obama's presidency kind of impacted not impacted, but made that simmering, I guess, resentment boil up to the surface. And kind of, she was talking about basically how the policing or the people, you'll see like what do they call them? The Karens or whatever, are like people caught on camera who are calling the cops and constantly policing, which that part is interesting because I don't necessarily think that's new, but I do think we see it a lot more because there's cameras on the phone. So it's just a lot more of that. But I can see what you're saying, that people feel now more entitled to exert their rank and show that, hey, what are you doing? Like, they can police you. So I thought that was an interesting section. But because of this week that we've had and all the politics and all the stuff, I didn't really even want to get into it. But that was another situation that stuck out. Our reset. I'm so sorry I just got here. No worries. It's going to be on replay. As soon as it's done, I'm going to post it so you could rewatch that. The one thing that really hit me was the discussion about the history of Black parents not being able to protect their children. Child, whew, that hits different. Like you don't even have a right over your body. You don't have a right. You can't protect yourself nor your kids. Like I can't even. But yes, that hit emotionally hard. It is so overwhelming to read during the election week, but necessary. I agree. God, yes, that part hit so hard during this week. It really did. Yes, it's so sick to keep us in our place. Lord, don't let that be the last comment that we ended on. I'm gonna have to write something nice and put it on the screen. All right, I don't really have anything. I couldn't think of anything too super positive. So I put great discussion. But yeah, so that's really all. Thank you guys for spending this time with us this Saturday. I guess love and light. I'll see you guys definitely in the next one. Probably have a few reviews on some other books I've been reading lately, but we'll reconvene on the last talk on Caste as we finish parts 5, 6, and 7, which is like another 100 pages. It's less than this last section that we read. And that won't be for another 2 weeks, but I look forward to the conversation and I'll see you guys there. All right, bye.